On the night my wife was buried, I said nothing about the $31 million medical tower in Seattle, nothing about the trust fund under my name, and nothing about the lake house they were standing inside. When my daughter-in-law pointed at the stairs and snapped, "Pack your things, old man. You don't live here anymore," I only said, "All right." My name is Henry Caldwell. I am 67 years old, and for 39 years I was married to Margaret Caldwell, the kind of woman who could quiet a room without raising her voice. The day she died, I believed grief would be the sharpest thing I would ever feel. By midnight, her family proved me wrong. Margaret's funeral in Seattle was beautiful in the way expensive sadness can be beautiful. White lilies, soft piano music, old friends speaking in careful voices, and 3 grown children pretending they had loved their mother with the same devotion she had given them. I stood beside her casket in my charcoal suit, holding myself together by sheer habit. Everyone told me I had been a devoted husband. They said Margaret had been lucky to have a man who sat beside her during treatments, learned every medication schedule, and slept in a chair near her hospital bed when the nurses tried to send him home. I thanked them quietly. I did not tell them devotion was the smallest part of love. Margaret's oldest son, Eric, gave the eulogy. He spoke about her strength, her grace, and the famous Caldwell name, even though Caldwell was my name, not his. Her daughter, Joanna, cried into a lace handkerchief and read a poem she had found online. Her youngest, Nolan, stood stiffly beside his wife, Betrayal, looking like a boy waiting to be told what to do. The reception was held at our home on Lake Washington. Everyone called it Margaret's house because Margaret had been the visible one, the polished one, the woman who hosted charity dinners and wrote checks with a steady hand. I let them believe that. People see what flatters their assumptions, and that family adored its assumptions. I watched distant cousins walk through my living room like appraisers at an estate sale. Eric ran his fingers over the antique clock in the hallway. Joanna whispered to her husband about the waterfront view. Brielle stood near the French doors, staring at the garden like she was already deciding where to put a swimming pool. Brielle had married Nolan 4 years earlier. From the beginning, she treated me as if I had wandered into the family by accident and refused to leave. To her, I was Margaret's second husband, a quiet older man who cooked soups, drove to doctor appointments, and smiled too much. She mistook kindness for weakness, which is an expensive mistake. All afternoon, Brielle watched me with that hard little gleam greedy people get when grief becomes an opportunity. When I went to the kitchen, she followed with her eyes. When I spoke to Margaret's sister, she leaned close to Joanna and whispered. When I sat down for 5 minutes, she smiled like a door quietly locking. The last guest left at 8:40 that night. I remember because the grandfather clock chimed once as I carried coffee cups into the kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly that one cup rattled against the counter. I had not cried yet. I was saving that for when the house was empty, and Margaret's absence finally had room to breathe. Behind me, footsteps stopped at the kitchen entrance. Not soft footsteps, deliberate ones. I turned and saw Brielle standing there in her black dress, arms folded, lips painted the same red she wore to Christmas dinners when she wanted to win arguments. Behind her stood Nolan, Eric, Joanna, and Joanna's husband, Paul. "Well," Brielle said, looking around my kitchen. "Now that the performance is over, we need to discuss what happens next." I set the cup down before I dropped it. "Performance?" I asked. She smiled without warmth. "The grieving widower routine. It worked beautifully today, Henry, but family business starts now." Nolan shifted behind her, but he did not speak. That hurt more than Brielle's voice. I had known Nolan since he was 11. I taught him to change a tire, took him to baseball practice, and sat with him in the ER when he broke his wrist. Now, he looked at the floor while his wife sharpened herself. "What family business?" I asked. Brielle stepped farther into the kitchen. "This house. Margaret's money. The properties. The accounts. Her children have responsibilities now. And frankly, you need to be realistic about your place in all of this." She said my place like I was a chair someone had forgotten to move. "This is my home," I said. My voice sounded thin even to me. Eric sighed, as if I had made things difficult by breathing. "Henry, nobody is trying to be cruel. But Mom would want her children protected. You've lived comfortably because of her for decades. Nobody begrudges you that, but the situation has changed." Joanna dabbed her eyes, but her voice was dry. "The house is too much for one person. The taxes alone must be terrible. It might be healthier for you to downsize." Brielle nodded, encouraged. "There are nice senior apartments around Tacoma. Quiet places. People your age do very well there." "People my age." The phrase landed like a slap wearing perfume. I looked at Nolan again, waiting for him to say anything at all. He rubbed his hands together and stared at the tile floor. His silence told me exactly what kind of man he had become under Brielle's thumb. "You want me to leave tonight?" I asked. Brielle did not hesitate. "Yes. It will be easier for everyone. Nolan and I will stay here to organize Margaret's affairs. Eric and Joanna need access to documents. You can pack clothes and personal items. The valuable things should remain until the estate is settled." The valuable things. My wife had been buried for less than 12 hours, and they were already inventorying the life we had built. I felt something inside me go very quiet. Grief was still there, but beneath it a colder, steadier thing had awakened and taken a seat at the table. "I see," I said. Brielle blinked. She had expected pleading. Maybe anger. Maybe a scene she could retell later as proof that I was unstable. Instead, I dried my hands on a towel. "I will pack tonight. I will be gone by morning." The kitchen fell so silent I could hear the refrigerator hum. "That is very sensible," Brielle said, though she sounded disappointed. "This does not need to be ugly." I almost laughed at that. Ugly had already entered the house, removed its shoes, and poured itself coffee. I only nodded, walked past them, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom I had shared with Margaret. I packed 2 suitcases. 2. I left the suits, the watches, the framed photographs, the silver pen Margaret gave me on our 25th anniversary. I left the artwork Brielle had already measured with her eyes. Let them think I was too broken to notice. Let them believe the old widower was walking away with socks and memories. Before I left, I stood in the doorway of Margaret's closet. Her blue scarf still hung on the hook near the mirror. I touched it once, not to say goodbye, but to remind myself that she had trusted me for a reason. Margaret had always said Henry people reveal themselves when they think the bill will never come. At 6:15 the next morning, I drove away from the lake house in my old Lincoln and checked into a modest hotel near SeaTac under the name Henry Vale, my mother's maiden name. The clerk barely looked up. To him, I was another tired, older man with funeral clothes and a credit card. Invisible. For the next few days, invisible was useful. The first call I made was to Martin Keene, my attorney of 22 years. Most people thought Martin had been Margaret's lawyer because Margaret signed public documents and appeared at fundraisers. In truth, Martin had managed my private affairs since before Margaret and I married. When he answered, his voice softened immediately. "Henry, I am so sorry." "Thank you, Martin," I said. "I need to see you today." He paused for half a second. "The children Brielle threw me out of my own house last night." His breathing changed. Martin was a patient man, but he disliked stupidity when it dressed itself as confidence. "Where are you?" he asked. "SeaTac. I'll text the address." He arrived 2 hours later with a leather briefcase and the expression of a man who already knew greed, had walked ahead of him and left dirty footprints. I told him everything. Brielle's words, Nolan's silence, Eric and Joanna's agreement, the demand that I leave my own home while my wife's flowers were still fresh. Martin listened without interrupting. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Do they know about North Harbor?" he asked. I shook my head. "They think Margaret owned everything important, and the Caldwell family trust. They do not know it exists. The house deed, they are standing inside it clueless." Martin leaned back. "Henry, legally you could have them removed today." I looked toward the hotel window where planes lifted through gray Seattle weather. "I know, but you don't want that. Not yet." He gave a thin smile. "You want them to get comfortable. I want them to show me exactly who they are when they believe I am powerless." That afternoon, I watched my own house from across the street. A moving van pulled into the driveway before lunch. Brielle directed 2 men carrying boxes through my front door. She had not waited 1 full day before moving in. Nolan carried a lamp behind her like an assistant. I sat in the Lincoln and felt my last illusion about him crack. My phone buzzed. A text from Nolan. "Hope you found somewhere decent, Henry. Brielle is helping organize Mom's office. We found some files that may need explaining." I stared at the message for a long moment. Mom's office. Margaret's office had contained old tax folders, charity letters, and enough harmless papers to keep vultures busy. The real documents were not in that house. They were in a private vault downtown beside trust instruments, property deeds, company ledgers, and the original purchase agreement for North Harbor Medical Tower. That building alone was worth $31 million. It sat near Swedish Medical Center, full of specialists paying rent every month like a choir of cash registers. I bought North Harbor 13 years before Margaret died using money from the sale of my father's industrial supply company. I had grown that company quietly after my father's stroke, then sold it to a national distributor for more money than most people ever see on paper. Margaret knew. She loved that I never bragged. Her children did not know because they had never asked who I was before I became their mother's husband. They knew I made pancakes, fixed gutters, and carried grocery bags. They knew I did not wear flashy watches or talk about investments at dinner. To them, a quiet man must be an empty man. That was their first mistake. Over the next 3 days, Betrayal called 6 times and left 4 voicemails. The first was firm. "Henry, we found inconsistencies in Margaret's papers." The second was irritated. "You need to call us back." The third was sharp. "Some of these accounts appear closed." The fourth almost pleased me. "We may need your signature on certain things." I did not respond. Instead, I met with my banker Annika Rao at Evergreen Private Wealth. Annika had handled my accounts for years with the serene focus of a surgeon. She offered condolences, then reviewed the documents Martin had prepared. "You want to move the reserve funds today?" she asked. "Yes. And notify the property managers. All of them." Her pen moved across the page. "May I speak freely, Mr. Caldwell?" "Always. I never understood why you let people believe Mrs. Caldwell was the financial center." I smiled sadly. Margaret enjoyed being underestimated in one direction. I enjoyed being underestimated in the other. Between us, it made a good shield. By Friday, the family had grown nervous enough to hire an attorney. Martin called me at 9:10 that morning. "They retained Miles Abernathy," he said. "He represents families who believe volume is a legal argument. What do they want?" "A formal reading of Margaret's will. Monday at 2. All named parties present." "Excellent," I said. Martin was quiet for a moment. "Henry, once we do this, there is no returning to the comfortable fiction." I looked around the hotel room at my 2 suitcases, my funeral shoes, the paper cup of bad coffee. Martin, the comfortable fiction died with Margaret. They buried it right after her. He said, "Then I'll bring the blue folder." I spent the weekend preparing, not emotionally but precisely. Grief had become a room inside me, and I would not let Betrayal furnish it. On Saturday, I bought a new navy suit at Nordstrom, plain but perfect. On Sunday, I moved from the airport hotel to the Fairmont downtown because remembering who you are sometimes requires better sheets. Monday morning came wet and silver, the kind of Seattle rain that makes the whole city look like a confession. I dressed slowly. Navy suit, white shirt, Margaret's favorite cufflinks, simple silver squares. I looked in the mirror and saw not a discarded widower, not a spare husband, not the old man Betrayal had imagined, but Henry Caldwell. Miles Abernathy's office was on the 26th floor of a glass tower near Pike Street. The receptionist looked me over, saw my age and quiet manner, and decided I belonged in the category marked manageable. "You're here for the Whitmore estate reading?" she asked. Margaret's first husband's name still clung to her children like ivy. "I am Henry Caldwell," I said. "Margaret Caldwell's husband." Something in my tone made her sit straighter. From inside the conference room, Betrayal's voice carried through the door. "He doesn't need to be part of this. He was married to her, yes, but this is Margaret's family estate." I stood very still and let myself hear every word. A man answered, "Probably Miles. The surviving spouse has legal standing. Eric said Mom supported him for years. We just want fairness," Joanna added. "He can't expect to keep everything because he was good at playing nurse." That sentence struck bone. I closed my eyes, once opened them, and felt the cold, steady thing in me stand up. Martin arrived at exactly 1:55 carrying the blue folder. Beside him walked Claire Donnelly, a litigation attorney with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a calm that made nervous people more nervous. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, shaking my hand. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She glanced toward the conference room. "I understand they have been educational." At 2 o'clock we entered. Betrayal sat at the head of the table, which told me everything about the kingdom she had built in 4 days. Nolan sat beside her, pale and restless. Eric and Joanna flanked them. Miles Abernathy stood near a screen with a stack of papers, trying to appear more confident than he felt. I took the chair across from Betrayal. Martin sat to my right, Claire sat to my left. Betrayal's eyes flicked to the blue folder. For the first time since Margaret's funeral, uncertainty crossed her face. It passed quickly, but I saw it. People like Betrayal mistake seeing quickly for seeing deeply. They are not the same. Miles began with formal language. Margaret had been of sound mind. She loved her children. She appreciated her husband's care. Small charitable gifts were named. Then he reached the section they had waited for. To my beloved children, Eric Whitmore, Joanna Ellis, and Nolan Whitmore, I leave the sum of $60,000 each. Eric frowned. Joanna's hand tightened around her pen. Brielle's face went blank, which meant fury had stepped behind the curtains to change costumes. Miles swallowed and continued. To my husband, Henry Caldwell, I leave the remainder of my estate, including personal property accounts held in my name and any residual interests not otherwise assigned. That can't be right, Brielle said immediately. Miles looked uncomfortable. It is what the document states. The remainder means the house, the waterfront property, the investment accounts. She turned to me. You cannot seriously believe Margaret wanted you to take everything from her children. I almost admired the speed with which theft became moral outrage in her mouth. Claire opened her notebook. Before anyone becomes too dramatic, we should clarify what actually belonged to Margaret. Brielle laughed once. Everything belonged to Margaret. Claire looked at her with polite interest. No, Mrs. Whitmore. That is the assumption causing most of your trouble. Martin placed the blue folder on the table and opened it. The room changed. Not visibly at first. There was still rain tapping the windows and a table between us. But something in the air tightened as Martin removed the first document. This is the deed to the Lake Washington residence, he said. The home currently occupied by Mr. Caldwell's stepfamily. He slid it toward Miles. Miles read the first page. His mouth parted slightly. Brielle snatched the paper before he could speak. Her eyes moved fast, then stopped. Henry Caldwell, Revocable Trust, she read. Her voice had gone thin. Claire nodded. Correct. The property was transferred into Mr. Caldwell's trust in 2012. Margaret Caldwell held marital occupancy rights. She did not own the house. That house was Mom's, Joanna whispered. She hosted everything there. I looked at her gently. Hosting in a house is not the same as owning it. Eric's face reddened. Where did you get the money to buy it? From my company, I said. What company? That question, after 39 years, told the whole sad story. Martin removed another document. Caldwell Industrial Supply was sold in 1998. Mr. Caldwell retained proceeds invested through Caldwell Holdings and later acquired several commercial properties. He looked at Brielle. This information was never hidden from anyone legally entitled to know it. You simply were not among those people. Brielle stared at me like I had removed a mask and shown teeth. You never worked. I worked for 30 years before your husband started high school, I said. After that, I managed investments, properties, leases, taxes, and payroll. I did not discuss it at dinner because Margaret liked peaceful meals. Nolan looked at me, then really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. Claire slid another page across the table. North Harbor Medical Tower. Purchased by Caldwell Holdings in 2013. Current appraised value $31 million. The number entered the room like thunder without sound. Joanna whispered, 31 million. Eric reached for the document, as if touching paper might change it. That building is yours, Nolan asked. I nodded. And the house mine. The Bainbridge property mine. The accounts Mom used for the charity foundation, funded mostly by me, administered publicly by your mother. His face folded inward. Brielle looked as if the floor had moved under her chair. Martin continued, calm as a church bell. The full portfolio under Mr. Caldwell's control is valued at approximately $52 million, not including personal effects inherited from Mrs. Caldwell's estate. Miles closed his eyes briefly. He knew then that his clients had marched him into a room carrying a paper sword. Brielle recovered first, or tried to. So you let us think Margaret had money. No, I said. You let yourselves think that. I never told you I was poor. I never told you I lived off your mother. I simply let silence reveal whether you would treat me as family or furniture. Her jaw trembled with rage. You manipulated us, she snapped. I gave you a chance, I replied. I had just buried my wife. You could have shown kindness. You could have said, Henry, this is your home too. We will figure it out together. Instead, you told me to pack my things before the lilies from Margaret's casket had wilted. The room went still. Nolan looked down. Eric shifted in his chair. Joanna's eyes filled, though I did not yet trust those tears. Brielle kept fighting because some people would rather drown standing up than admit the water is real. We were grieving, she said. You were measuring rooms, I answered. Claire turned a page. There is one practical issue remaining. Mr. Caldwell has not granted permission for any of you to reside in the Lake Washington property. Your belongings were moved in after he left under pressure. Legally, that places you in a difficult position. Brielle's voice cracked. Are you calling us trespassers? I am calling you guests, whose invitation never existed, Claire said. Mr. Caldwell is prepared to give you 72 hours to remove your belongings. Brielle looked at Nolan. He finally lifted his eyes, but not to defend her. That, I think, frightened her more than the documents. Control begins to die the moment witnesses stop helping it breathe. I stood. You have until Thursday at 6. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. After that, the locks change, the alarm codes change, and formal eviction papers will be filed if necessary. Brielle pushed her chair back. Henry, wait. We can talk privately. We're family. I paused at the door. Family, I said softly. Margaret spent 39 years teaching me that family is shown by what people do when there is nothing to gain. You showed me what the word means to you. I believe you. Then I walked out with Martin and Claire behind me, leaving the blue folder open on the table like a wound. The first call came before I reached the lobby. Brielle. I let it ring. Then Nolan. Then Joanna. Then Eric. By the time I stepped into the rain, my phone looked like a small panicked machine. I turned it off and stood under the awning for a moment, letting the city blur silver around me. I did not feel joy. That surprised me. I had imagined satisfaction would taste brighter. Instead, I felt a heavy quiet, the kind that comes after a storm tears dead branches from a tree. Necessary is not always pleasant. Justice can arrive wearing work boots instead of a crown. Still, I breathed easier than I had in days. That evening, I returned to the Fairmont and ordered salmon soup and a glass of red wine Margaret would have approved of. I ate by the window while rain braided itself down the glass. My phone was back on, buzzing every few minutes. I listened to the first voicemail only because curiosity remains human even when dignity is trying to supervise. Brielle's voice was tight. Henry, this has gotten out of hand. We were emotional. You cannot punish everyone over a misunderstanding. I deleted it. A misunderstanding is when someone takes the wrong coat at a restaurant. Throwing a widower out of his home on the night of his wife's funeral is a character statement. The next morning, Nolan came to the hotel. The concierge called up and asked whether I would receive him. I almost said no. Then I remembered the boy who used to fall asleep on my couch, after Little League cleats still on face sticky with orange soda. That boy was buried somewhere under the man Brielle had trained. I wanted to know if he could still breathe. Nolan sat across from me in the lobby with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. Henry, he began, then stopped. His eyes were red. I am sorry. I said nothing. Apologies are often nervous birds. If you move too quickly, they fly back into excuses. I waited. He swallowed. I should have stopped her. Yes, I said. The word landed cleanly. He flinched. I was shocked. I thought Mom had left us more, and Brielle kept saying you would take advantage. And because you believed I had nothing, it became acceptable to remove me. His face reddened. It sounds awful when you say it like that. It was awful while you did it. He looked away. I know. For the first time, his voice did not sound coached. You raised me more than my father ever did. You were at every game, every school meeting, every stupid emergency. When Mom got sick, you carried the whole house. And I stood there while my wife treated you like a stray dog. I felt the old ache move through me. Why, I asked. He looked at me then. Because I am weak, he said. Because Brielle is loud, and I got used to letting her be my spine. Because I wanted money I had not earned, and once I wanted it, I started seeing you as the obstacle. It was ugly. It was also honest. What do you want from me, Nolan? I asked. I don't know, he whispered. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just needed to say I know what I did. I studied him. Fear was there, yes. But beneath it was shame, and shame can be useful if it becomes responsibility instead of self-pity. You have until Thursday, I said. His shoulders dropped. I know. I will not extend it. I know. And I will not pay your bills, rescue your marriage, or protect you from the consequences of choices you made as a grown man. His eyes filled. I know. That was new. Nolan Whitmore had rarely known anything without being told by someone stronger. He left after 20 minutes. No hug. No promise. Just a nod at the elevator and a look that said something inside him had begun to hurt in the right direction. I did not forgive him that day. Forgiveness, is not a vending machine where someone inserts regret and receives absolution. But I did not close the door forever. The final 72 hours were a theater performance staged by desperate people. Eric called Martin demanding a fair family settlement. Joanna left a voicemail saying Margaret would be ashamed of me, which was impressive from a woman who had watched her mother's husband be exiled from his own kitchen. Brielle called 17 times. I blocked her after 9. On Thursday afternoon, I drove to the lake house. I arrived at 5:40, 20 minutes before the deadline. 3 cars filled the driveway. A rented cargo van sat near the garage. Through the window, I saw Brielle pacing the living room with her phone pressed to her ear. She was wearing cream trousers, not morning black anymore. Grief had apparently changed outfits. I used my key and entered. The voices stopped. The living room looked like a small, defeated warehouse. Boxes, garment bags, bubble wrap, framed photographs leaning against chairs. Brielle stood near the fireplace. Eric and Joanna were by the bookshelves. Nolan stood near the hallway holding a cardboard box marked kitchen. 2 strangers sat on the sofa. Henry, Brielle said, forcing brightness into her voice like stuffing too much fabric into a drawer. Good. You're here. We were hoping to have a reasonable conversation. I looked at the strangers. A middle-aged couple, well-dressed, uncomfortable. And you are, the man stood. Grant and Melissa Parker. Brielle's parents. Of course. Reinforcements. Brielle had likely told them a version where I, the greedy old husband, had stolen a grieving family's inheritance. People like Brielle prefer audiences who arrive preloaded. I shook Grant's hand, then Melissa's. Henry Caldwell, I said, Margaret's husband, and the owner of this home. Melissa blinked. Grant looked at Brielle. Owner, I smiled mildly. I assumed that part was left out. Brielle's nostrils flared. Henry, please don't twist this. I turned back to her parents. Your daughter moved into my house the morning after my wife's funeral after ordering me to pack my bags and leave. Melissa's hand flew to her chest. Brielle. It wasn't like that, Brielle said quickly. We thought he was trying to take advantage of the estate. The estate, I said, mostly consisted of personal property and modest accounts. The house, commercial buildings, and investment funds belonged to me before Margaret died. Grant frowned. How much property are we discussing? Enough that your daughter's assumptions became very expensive. Brielle snapped. He hid everything. I lived quietly, I said. There is a difference. Melissa stared at her daughter now, and I saw the first crack in Brielle's borrowed army. Did you tell him to leave on the night of the funeral? Melissa asked. Brielle looked trapped. Everyone was emotional. That is not an answer, Grant said. His voice had changed. Not loud but fatherly. In the old sense, the kind that still expects truth to stand up straight. Brielle said nothing. Silence confessed for her. I almost pitied her. Almost. There are moments when a person realizes the story they sold has been opened from the back and all the stitching is visible. Brielle's parents saw the thread. They saw their daughter not as the injured wife protecting family but as the woman who had thrown a grieving man out for a house she did not own. Grant turned to me red with embarrassment. Mr. Caldwell, I apologize. We were told this was a dispute over your late wife's estate. It became a dispute when your daughter decided my grief was an obstacle. Melissa closed her eyes. Brielle Marie Parker, tell me you did not call this man useless. Brielle's face went white. I had not mentioned that word, which meant Brielle had. Maybe bragged, maybe vented, maybe used it at her parents' kitchen table as if cruelty were proof of strength. I looked at Melissa and said, she used several words. Useless was one of the kinder ones. Grant picked up his coat. Melissa, we're leaving. Dad, Brielle said, panic breaking through. No, he replied. You were raised better than this, and if you weren't, that failure is ours. But I will not sit here and help you bully a widower out of his own home. The sentence struck her harder than anything I had said. Sometimes judgment hurts most when it comes from the people who named you. After her parents left, the room felt smaller. Brielle stood frozen. Eric suddenly found a box fascinating. Joanna wiped at her cheeks. Nolan looked at me and for once did not look away. I checked my watch. 12 minutes, I said. At 6, the locksmith begins. That moved them faster than any speech. Boxes were carried. Closet doors opened and closed. Shoes, lamps, files, and Brielle's pale velvet dining chairs vanished into the cargo van. I stood in the entryway, not supervising, just witnessing. This was not revenge in the way angry people understand it. I was not destroying them. I was merely refusing to keep cushioning their fall. At 6:03, the locksmith arrived. Brielle was the last one inside. She stood at the foot of the stairs, staring at me with wet, furious eyes. Margaret would hate this, she said. That was the cruelest arrow she had left. I let it come. Then I answered Margaret knew exactly what she had married. She also knew exactly what she had raised. Brielle's lips parted, but no words came. For once, silence belonged to me. She walked out past me, perfume and rage trailing behind her. Nolan paused at the door. "Henry," he said. I held up a hand. "Not today." He nodded, accepted that, and left. Acceptance was the first decent thing he had done all week. When the last car disappeared, the house exhaled. I know houses do not truly breathe, but anyone who has lived through grief understands that walls hold weather. The rooms felt stripped, not empty. Brielle had removed her boxes, but the heaviness had gone with them. The locksmith changed the front door first. The sound of the drill felt like a hymn. I walked through the house afterward. The kitchen was quiet. Margaret's mug still sat on the top shelf, the yellow one with a hairline crack she refused to throw away. I took it down, washed it, and set it beside mine. Then I stood at the sink and finally cried. Not for Brielle, not for the money, for Margaret. The next weeks were strange. Legal letters came and went. Eric threatened to contest the will, until Miles Abernathy apparently explained math and law in the same meeting. Joanna sent a long email that used the word hurt 11 times and accountability 0 times. I did not answer. Nolan sent one short message. I am sorry. I hope one day I can prove it. I moved back into the lake house slowly. Not because I had to, but because grief needs room to decide where it wants to sit. I replaced nothing at first. I left Margaret's reading chair by the window. I kept her garden gloves near the back door. I donated some clothes, boxed others, and kept the blue scarf on the closet hook. 3 months later, North Harbor needed roof repairs, and I spent 2 full weeks buried in contractor bids. It helped. Buildings are honest in ways people often are not. A roof leaks. A pipe bursts. A lease expires. No one calls it a misunderstanding. You fix what is broken, or you live under the drip. I heard things through the community grapevine. Brielle and Nolan had moved into a rental in Bellevue they could barely afford. Eric sold his boat. Joanna stopped posting inspirational quotes about family loyalty. Brielle's parents had cut off a loan she expected. I did not celebrate. Consequences are not confetti. They are invoices. 6 months after Margaret's funeral, my phone rang at 5:12 in the morning. I was in the kitchen grinding coffee beans, watching dawn lighten the lake. The number was unfamiliar but local. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then something in me, perhaps the old fatherly reflex, answered. Henry Caldwell. This is Dr. Samuel Ortiz at Harborview Medical Center, a calm voice said. I have Nolan Whitmore here. You are listed as his emergency contact. The grinder clicked off by itself. What happened? Car accident. He is stable, but he has a broken collarbone and a concussion. He keeps asking whether we called Henry. Emergency contact. After everything, after the silence and shame and eviction, Nolan had still written down my name. I stood there, one hand on the counter, and felt anger, love, grief, and old habit collide in my chest. I'll be there, I said. Then I hung up and went upstairs to change. Harborview at dawn smells like disinfectant, burnt coffee, and fear trying to behave. I found Nolan in a private room with bruises blooming along his jaw and a sling around his arm. He looked smaller than 38. When he saw me, his face crumpled. You came, he said. The same words people use when they know they gave you reasons not to. You were hurt, I said, taking the chair beside the bed. That still matters. His eyes filled. Brielle didn't answer. We're separated. She left 2 months ago. I already knew some of that, but I let him say it. Where did she go? Back to her parents. Then Arizona, I think. She said she married into security, not struggle. I looked at him carefully. And what did you think marriage was? He gave a broken laugh. Apparently something I never learned properly. We sat in the hospital quiet. A nurse checked his IV. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. Nolan stared at the ceiling as if the answer might be written in the tiles. I need to tell you about that night, he said. You don't have to do this while injured. Yes, I do. His voice strengthened. I knew it was wrong. When Brielle told you to pack your bags, I knew. I felt it right here. He touched his chest with his good hand, and I still said nothing. I looked at the boy I had helped raise. Why his mouth trembled? Because I wanted what I thought Mom had left. Because Brielle told me you would drain the estate. Because I was angry, Mom died and scared there wouldn't be enough, and somehow I made you the enemy because you were standing there. That was the truth, ugly but finally alive. He continued, you taught me to drive. You came to my college orientation when Mom had a migraine. You loaned me money after my first business failed and never told anyone. You sat beside me when my daughter was born. And I repaid you by letting my wife throw you out. I looked away because my eyes had begun to burn. Men of my generation were taught to hide tears like contraband, but grief had already searched my pockets. I do not know what you want me to say, Nolan. He wiped his face awkwardly. Nothing. I don't deserve a speech. I just needed you to know I remember now. Remember what I asked? He looked at me. That you were my father in every way that counted, even when I refused to call you that. The words entered me slowly. They did not erase what had happened. Nothing could. But they reached a locked room inside me and knocked with a familiar hand. I sat forward. Nolan, remorse is a beginning. It is not a bridge. He nodded. I know. If you want a relationship with me, you build it without money, without inheritance, without Brielle pushing you toward whatever benefits her. I know. And I will not become invisible again so you can feel comfortable. He closed his eyes. I don't want you invisible. I think that was the problem. You were standing in front of me for 27 years and I only saw what I needed you to be. That sentence mattered. Not because it was polished. Because it was not. It sounded like a man finding a tool in the dark. Then we can try, I said. He opened his eyes. Try, slowly, carefully. With boundaries so clear, you can trip over them. A watery smile touched his mouth. That sounds fair. It is more than fair. I know. For once the words did not sound weak. They sounded like a man putting both feet on the floor. Before I left, I spoke with his doctor, arranged nothing beyond information, and refused to pay for anything he had not asked me to pay for. That may sound cold, but it was the opposite. Rescue can be another form of control if you are not careful. I had been everyone's quiet solution for too long. At the door, Nolan called my name. I turned. What about Eric and Joanna? He asked. What about them? Do you think they could ever? He trailed off. I understood. My door is not locked, I said. But I am done dragging people through it. They know where I am. He nodded. And Brielle, I did not hesitate. Brielle burned her bridge, then complained about the smoke. Some people can be forgiven only from a distance. Nolan absorbed that. He did not defend her. That too was new. I left him in the hospital with a nurse adjusting his pillow and sunlight beginning to touch the window behind him. That evening I sat in Margaret's garden. The roses had come back stronger than expected. Margaret used to say roses were dramatic little warriors, all velvet and knives. My phone buzzed twice. Eric, Joanna. I let both calls go to voicemail. Later I listened. Their voices were stiff, embarrassed, asking to talk. Not demanding. Asking. I did not call back that night. I made tea in Margaret's yellow mug, sat on the back steps, and watched the lake turn black beneath the moon. For the first time in months, silence did not feel like abandonment. It felt like ownership. My life was mine again. Every room, every dollar, every boundary, every yes and every no. The next week, Nolan came home from the hospital to his studio apartment, not my house. I visited once with soup and groceries. He tried to refuse the groceries, then accepted them when I said food was care, not rescue. We ate at his tiny table, and for the first time in years, he asked me about my father's company. So I told him. Not everything. Enough. I told him about loading trucks at 16, negotiating contracts at 30, sitting beside my father after his stroke, and learning how fear can either shrink a man or sharpen him. Nolan listened, without checking his phone, without waiting for inheritance to appear between the sentences. A month later, Joanna came to the lake house. She cried before she sat down. Some tears were regret. Some were embarrassment. Some I suspected were grief finally arriving late because greed had blocked the driveway. She apologized without mentioning the will. That was wise. I made coffee. We talked for 40 minutes. It was not healing, but it was a start. Eric took longer. Pride had built a summer home in that man's chest. When he finally called, he sounded like he was reading from a statement prepared by a better person. I listened. Then I told him to call back when he could speak without performing. He hung up. 3 days later, he called again. That conversation went better. Brielle sent one letter through an attorney asking whether I would consider a reasonable family compensation package for emotional distress. Claire laughed for nearly 15 seconds when she read it. I told her to answer with one sentence. Mr. Caldwell declines. Some doors deserve no poetry, just a lock that works. 1 year after Margaret's funeral, I hosted dinner at the lake house. Not a grand reunion. Not a movie ending. Nolan came. Joanna came with her husband. Eric came alone and brought a pie from a bakery because he had never learned to cook. We ate grilled salmon, roasted potatoes, and Margaret's lemon cake from her handwritten recipe. Before dessert, Nolan stood at the end of the table. His voice shook, but he did not sit down. I want to say something, he said. Everyone went quiet. A year ago, we treated Henry like he was extra, like he was attached to Mom's life instead of part of it. I did that. I am ashamed of it. I watched him grip the chair. He did not owe us forgiveness, money, shelter, or another chance. Whatever relationship we have from here on, we earn it. Joanna cried softly. Eric stared at his plate. I looked toward Margaret's empty chair and imagined her expression, not triumphant, not sentimental, but satisfied in that private way she had when someone finally told the truth. After dinner, Nolan helped me wash dishes. He dried the yellow mug carefully and placed it back on the shelf. Do you think Mom would be angry? He asked. I thought about that. At what all of it? I handed him another plate. Your mother had a long memory, a sharp mind, and a low tolerance for cruelty. She would be angry. She would also be relieved we stopped pretending. He nodded. Outside, the lake moved in the dark. Inside, the house felt inhabited again, not by the old illusion of family, but by something more cautious and perhaps more honest. That was enough. People expect revenge stories to end with enemies destroyed. Sometimes the better ending is simpler. The locks are changed, the truth is spoken, and no one gets to mistake your kindness for permission again. So yes, I let them throw me out. I let them call me useless. I let them move into my house, open my drawers, and plan their future on property that had never belonged to them. Not because I was weak, because I wanted the truth to arrive with receipts, signatures, deeds, and witnesses. If there is one thing Margaret taught me, it is this. Love should make you generous, not blind. Family should make you safer, not smaller. And when people reveal that they only valued the version of you they could use, believe them the first time. Then decide calmly and legally how close they are allowed to stand. I am Henry Caldwell. I lost my wife, my illusion of family, and a few old habits that had overstayed their welcome. I kept my home, my dignity, and my peace. The money helped, I won't lie. $52 million makes certain lessons easier to deliver. But the real inheritance Margaret left me was clarity. Now I want to ask you something. If your own family threw you out while counting money they thought was theirs, would you forgive them after the truth came out, or would you change the locks and never look back? Tell me where you are watching from and tell me what you would have done in my place.